This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company. Joining me now from the Sky News Centre, Liberal MP Paul Fletcher, a man with very good taste in ties. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Kieran.
And in Melbourne, we've got Labor MP Kelvin Thompson. Kelvin Thompson, good to see you. The Prime Minister tried to refocus the debate on IR at the weekend. Distracted by the party's criticism of the Greens, though, what did you make of all of that? Was it all a bit counterproductive?
I think, Kieran, that we will have a debate about industrial relations for as long as the Liberal Party suggests that they are going to make changes to the workplace relations legislation if they are elected to government. There's a very simple way for them to kill off an industrial relations debate, and that is to say that they support Labor's legislation and they support the current framework. But if they're going to use expressions like flexibility, then people will be concerned that what this really means is a reduction in penalty rates and a reduction in their capacity to bargain at the workplace.
All right. Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but just quickly on this Greens issue, distracted from the Prime Minister's message on workplace. What's your view on that? Was that a distraction? Was that necessary?
Kieran, I've been given plenty of opportunities to comment about this and I haven't. My view is that you're better off to campaign positively about yourself and your own policies rather than attacking opponents. I have some experience in this. I won the electorate of Wills by campaigning against an incumbent independent who was to my left, and I always found that it was better off to be positive about yourself and about your own policies, and that's the approach that I take.
All right. Well, on the IR issue, Paul Fletcher, is this a vulnerability for the coalition? Obviously not right now. There's not many vulnerabilities for Tony Abbott's team at the moment. But you know as well as I do that the political cycle will turn and eventually he'll have to come up with something definitive on this issue. And he's under pressure to do so from within your own party, isn't he, Paul?
Well, Kieran, we'll bring out a detailed and sensible policy on industrial relations in the lead up to the next election. But let's just be clear as to why Julia Gillard put this issue on the agenda at the New South Wales Labor Party conference over the weekend. It was a deliberate attempt to distract from the debate which is going on, the vigorous debate going on within the Labor Party about whether they should be in bed with the Greens or not. Right now, the Labor Party is in a coalition with the Greens, and the Greens are calling the shots in the way that our country is governed. Now, we've just heard Kelvin say he doesn't want to talk about the Greens. I'm not surprised he doesn't want to talk about the Greens, but the Australian people know that the Greens are controlling this country through their alliance with the Labor Party, and for so long as the Labor Party is in an alliance with the Greens, the Australian people know what is going on. So it's all very well for Kelvin to say he doesn't want to talk about it, but the reality is every day, Kelvin, your party is effectively writing a reference for the Greens. That's what you're doing on a daily basis. And so it's no wonder that there is a vigorous internal debate because people know the damage that the Greens are doing to Australia.
OK, I'll go back to Kelvin on that in a moment, Paul. I will put that, what you've said just now, to him in a moment. I do want to get your thoughts, though, on this IR issue before we move on. It's not causing many problems now, but undealt with, it could be a big concern, couldn't it?
Well, Kieran, we'll have a sensible and detailed industrial relations policy, workplace relations policy in the lead up to the next election. And we'll be looking, as Tony Abbott has said in recent days, we'll be looking at some sensible incremental changes because Australians know that the pendulum has gone too far in the changes that Julia Gillard has made, and Australians can see the effects on a daily basis. There are cafes and restaurants that are closed on Sundays because the penalty rates are simply too high. There are young Australians who are unable to get jobs because of the inflexible arrangements which have been imposed as a sop to the union. So is there room for incremental change which will mean more Australians can get jobs, young Australians can get a start? There certainly is. And do Australians recognise that? And are Australians putting that to us every day? They certainly are. But we are talking about sensible incremental change.
All right, Kelvin, first on that IR issue, then I'll follow up the Greens issue. Let's talk about the IR matter because Bill Shorten has undertaken a review of the Fair Work Act. The government's looking at changes. So isn't it a bit rich to be saying the coalition shouldn't look at fine-tuning the Fair Work Act? Tony Abbott has said that that would be the basis upon which, or the framework within which he'd make changes.
The government is looking at changes, but those changes are about supporting workers and protecting workers. We just heard Paul saying that he thinks the pendulum has swung too far and that penalty rates are too high. It's this kind of statement that's the reason why there will be an industrial relations debate at the next election, and why this is not a red herring but a matter of real concern to many Australians and many Australian workers, and why Julia Gillard was absolutely right to be raising this issue at the New South Wales State Conference. This will be a matter about which there will be considerable public debate, and should be considerable public debate. Workers need to have their present entitlements and capacity to bargain protected. We do not want to go back to the era of work choices. The Australian public made that clear in 2007, and yet we've got Liberal figures like Paul Fletcher saying that penalty rates are too high.
OK, Kelvin, on the Greens issue then, Paul Fletcher made the point that you're writing a reference for the Greens every day because you're in alliance with them federally. That's why the Prime Minister didn't directly mention the issue at all in her speech yesterday. She can't, because while some of her colleagues in the Labor Party are critical of the minor party, the Prime Minister is in alliance with them federally.
Well, Kieran, you've seen the Parliament in operation. The way the Parliament operates is that the government is introducing its legislation. We are getting our legislation through the Parliament and following our agenda. If you look at the budget that Wayne Swan brought down earlier this year, it was a Labor budget producing Labor outcomes. We are very proud of the outcomes in relation to health, in relation to education, in relation to infrastructure, things like trebling the tax-free threshold, lifting that to over $18,000. These are all Labor reforms of which we are proud and about which we will campaign.
How's the fight playing out in Melbourne, do you think? You watch Victorian politics very closely. There's a by-election this coming Saturday. Is it hindering the Labor campaign, this argument against the Greens in a very progressive seat?
Well, it's predictable, Kieran, that if there's no Liberal candidate and the Labor and Greens candidates are going to poll most of the votes, it's predictable that those candidates will turn some of their fire on each other. I think that we did better in the Nidri by-election earlier on, where again there was no Liberal candidate, but the Labor candidate there, Ben Carroll, ran a very strong campaign against the Baillieu government and the measures it was taking. Obviously we should be campaigning about things that the Baillieu government is doing, the cuts to TAFE and the like. I think that's where our campaign strategy is strongest. Time will tell what the result is there, but it's predictable if you've got the two parties, the Labor and the Greens as the dominant parties in the electorate of Melbourne, that there will be some hostilities between them.
OK, and Paul Fletcher, finally, there's some polling, a report by Jeff Kidney in the Financial Review suggesting focus groups are suggesting people don't think Tony Abbott's going to repeal the carbon tax. Doesn't say much about the view of the electorate towards all of our political leaders at the moment, if there's that scepticism about what Tony Abbott calls a blood pledge.
Well, the Coalition has been very clear. The next election will be a referendum on the carbon tax. If we win the next election, we will do so on the basis of a promise to repeal the carbon tax. That is the commitment we will be taking to the Australian people. If the Australian people give us their trust, we will act on that commitment. We have laid down in detail, Tony Abbott has announced in detail, the steps that he will be taking to repeal the carbon tax, including, if necessary, going to a double dissolution election.
Paul Fletcher, Kelvin, Thompson, good to see you both. Thanks a lot for that this morning. Appreciate it. And finally on AIM Agenda, we're going to take a quick look at American